Hey, JC here. I hope you're having a good day. I'd like to read to you an email one of our regular participants sent in, and then I'm going to have a response. Debbie says, I so appreciate your kind words to me a few days ago to help lift my spirits and to get me to think better about myself. In your story, you said you also were an alcoholic and in 1998 turned your life around. Would you be so kind to share what went through your mind during those years you drank? What you thought of others? Were you in a relationship at the time? I truly would appreciate hearing your story from you on that part of your life, and it might help many of us who cannot understand the alcoholic's thinking during their drinking periods or even when they are trying to abstain. If this would be too hard for you, I would understand, but I think your readers would get a lot of insight from this, and I know I definitely would. Debbie, thanks for encouraging me to share my experience. It's my pleasure to do so with all of you. You know, from the time I would awaken until the time I would go to sleep, all I could think about was where I was going to get a drink from, how I was going to fit that into my day, and then how I was going to hide it from the people that I was closest to. You know, on this website, I have shared often about what the common characteristics are that we find among alcoholics. They have a tendency to lie and steal, break plans, blame others for their problems, and take advantage of those people that they are closest to. During the worst months of my drinking, I certainly had all of those characteristics working within my life. Thank God that I am not the same way that I used to be. And I really mean that. I had made living amends to those people that I hurt greatly by staying sober since 1998. And that calculates to over 14 years to this present day. You know, I've shared often on this website about how we never know when an alcoholic is right on the edge of hitting bottom. Let me share with you a couple of experiences I had during the worst time of my drinking. It was about a 6-month period after my mom passed away when I really spiraled down into the very pits of alcoholism. I was working as a cabinet maker at the time. I had my own business, and there was a contractor I had worked for a long time, and I'm sure that he noticed I had been spiraling downward and I was going through a difficult time. I went to his office to pick up a check. It was just him and I in this small room. He handed me the check and he said, I'd like to talk to you about something if you've got a minute. And he was about this much shorter than me. He had a big smile on his face. He was a godly man, and he had that special twinkle in his eye. He began to talk to me about how God could take care of any problem that I had, and then if I would just surrender my life to Him, that I would find help for my problems, that He had promised that He would never leave me, He would not forsake me, and that I would find joy, and I would be able to get through all the difficulties in life, and that He had a better way for me to live. And I remember listening to him, sharing these things with me, thinking, I just need to get out of here. Just let me out of here. I don't want to hear what this guy is saying. But at the same time, I knew that there was something very special that he had that I was desiring as he was talking to me. And I remember I left his office, and it was probably, 4 months after that I finally hit bottom and I got sober. And I remember telling him afterward, thank you for having that talk with me. Now, on another instance, the place where I was renting in a warehouse, my landlord was also a godly man, and he would come by once a month and he would knock on my door to collect rent. I had 2 entrances into my shop, and during the time when I was drinking, oftentimes I would keep the doors closed and locked, and I would have a beer sitting on my desk. Anyhow, he would come around, he would knock on the door, and I would open the door, and I'd have that beer sitting on my desk. I would hand him the check, and he'd get a big smile on his face, and he'd look at me, and he'd look at that beer, and he'd point to the beer, and he'd say to me, you know that's not the answer to your problem, don't you? God is the answer to what you're going through. And he would just smile at me and say, have a good day, and I would close the door, and that would be the end of it. And he did this for several months, collecting my rent. When he would see me drinking alcohol or see that I was in pretty bad shape, he would remind me of what he told me. And so it's interesting. We never know what's going on behind the scenes. You know, if we're godly people and we're praying for the alcoholic, our prayers are being answered. God is faithful to send people across the alcoholic or the addict's path to try and help them look at themselves and tell them that there is a better way to live. The night prior to me hitting bottom and asking for help, I had gotten into a fight with a guy that was about 2 times my size. Now, I had never really been in a physical fight before, and I was in my mid-30s when this happened. This guy pulverized me. We got into a fight on brick pavement, and I had scrapes all over my body. The following day, I got up to go to work, and I went to the convenience store like I had been doing for a long time to get beer to take to work with me. And I was feeling so awful that morning. I pulled into a parking lot on my way to work. I had a beer in my hand, and I looked at myself in the rearview mirror. I was crying and upset, and I just had this realization that my life was falling apart. Something happened when I looked in that rearview mirror. I saw these scrapes all across my bald forehead from where this guy had just ran me into those brick pavers. And I had scrapes all down my arms and my knees, and I was messed up pretty bad. I didn't have to go to the hospital. But when I looked in that mirror, I think God helped me because I realized that I had become the man that I so desperately never wanted to become. I was failing at being self-employed, and that was a tremendous goal in my life, to be successful at business. I had 3 children. I was failing at being a father. I had a family, and I knew that if I didn't change my ways, that everything that I wanted out of life, the American dream, was going to completely fall to pieces if I didn't pull my act together. And that morning, I made a call to AA. I knew that I could go to AA to get help, and the only way that I knew that is because I grew up with a mom who went in and out of treatment facilities and hospitals because she battled with a drinking problem for about 10 years. And then she finally got sober, and she stayed sober through going to the AA program. So I knew if I could get there, that there was help to be found. I went into the AA meeting, and one of the first suggestions that they put out there for me was for me to ask God to take away my desire for a drink, and I did that. The next morning when I woke up, I did not have a desire to have a drink. And I had had a physical craving and a mental addiction to alcohol for months that I had no control over. And I knew that God had done something for me that I had not been able to do for myself. And that was the beginning of a long relationship that I continue to have to this day with God. And I remember what my next prayer was, and that was, God, I do not want to become a religious fanatic, because I knew that He had done something for me that nobody else had been able to do. Not myself, not my wife, or my children. No one could have convinced me to stop drinking and help take away that desire the way that He did on that day. And that was the beginning of my journey for getting sober and also staying sober. And I give God all of the credit for keeping me sober for all of this time. Now, Debbie, one of the things that you asked me was about the damage done to relationships during that drinking period. And after I got sober, there was most definitely a distinct period where I had this realization of all of the hurts that had happened to my children. And I began to write them down. And as I started writing down all of the ways that I knew that I had hurt them, I decided that I was going to make amends for those hurts. And I put all of those things in letters for each of my children. And I sent those letters to my kids so that they would have them. And then I spoke to each of my children individually, and I apologized to them and told them that things were going to be different because I was sober now. And I mentioned at the beginning of this video, I have made amends to my kids, not only through writing amends to them, but also through making a living amend to them for the past 14 years by staying sober. So I feel it's really important that when an alcoholic decides to get into recovery, that, you know what, the proof is really in how long they're going to stay sober. I feel like there needs to be a trial period. If they have really wreaked havoc in our lives, the way that I had wreaked havoc in many people's lives, that there should be a trial period where they have to prove themselves and reestablish trust. Now, I have another relationship in my life where I did some serious damage during those drinking years, and that person has decided to just shut me out of their life. And I've made several attempts to join together with them and try and work out our differences, because I'm not the same person that I used to be. But you know, it takes two people to be willing to work at something, and they haven't come to the place of where they're willing to try and work out some of those things that happened during those years when I was drinking. But I do believe in a big God, and I'm trusting that that particular relationship will be healed someday, and that amends will be made and things will work out for the better in that relationship.